He taunted police with coded letters, killed without mercy, and became America's most infamous unidentified killer. To this day, the Zodiac remains free. This is the story of a phantom who turned murder into a puzzle, fear into obsession, and left behind one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. In this episode, we step back into late 1960s Northern California, where a string of brutal murders marked the birth of the Zodiac Killer, a man whose name alone would terrify millions. The story begins in the summer of 1968, Vallejo, California, a quiet city just north of San Francisco. Teenagers David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen parked on a gravel road for what should have been an ordinary December evening. Moments later, gunfire shattered the silence. Both teens were found shot dead beside their car. No witnesses, no motive. At the time, police treated it as a random act, a tragic but isolated crime. But 6 months later, it happened again. On July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferran and Michael Mageau sat in a parked car at Blue Rock Springs. A vehicle pulled up behind them. A man approached and opened fire. Ferran was killed instantly. Mageau survived and gave police their first description. A white male, 25 to 30, stocky build, short brown hair, wearing heavy-rimmed glasses. It would be the first real glimpse of a man the world would soon call Zodiac. On August 1st, 1969, 3 major newspapers received letters postmarked from San Francisco. Each one began with the same chilling introduction. "Dear editor, I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas and the girl on the 4th of July." Inside each letter was a cryptogram, 408 characters of strange symbols, circles, and triangles. The writer demanded the cipher be printed on the front page of each newspaper, or he would kill again, and he signed it with a circle and a cross, the mark of the Zodiac. Within days, a husband and wife team, Donald and Betty Harden, cracked the first cipher. The solution shocked the nation. "I like killing people because it's so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest. Man is the most dangerous animal of all." There was no remorse, no demand for money, just a promise of more violence and a vow that his identity was hidden somewhere in his ciphers. Over the next 2 years, the Zodiac's spree continued, unpredictable, theatrical, and cold. September 27th, 1969, Lake Berryessa. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking by the water when a man in a black execution-style hood approached them, carrying a gun and a knife. On his chest, the same crosshair symbol. He tied them up and stabbed them repeatedly. Then he walked to their car, drew his symbol on the door, and wrote the date, September 27th, 69, 6:30 p.m. Cecilia died 2 days later. Brian survived to tell the tale. Just 2 weeks after that attack, the Zodiac struck again, this time in San Francisco itself. October 11th, 1969, taxi driver Paul Stein was shot in the head while on duty in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Witnesses saw a man wiping down the cab before walking calmly away. Moments later, responding officers unknowingly stopped and spoke to him, but let him go after a mistaken description was broadcast. The Zodiac had walked right past the police and vanished into the night. Days later, another letter arrived. This time, it included a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt, proof that the Zodiac wasn't bluffing. He had turned murder into theater, and the audience was terrified. Between 1969 and 1974, more than 20 letters reached newsrooms and police stations across California. Some included new ciphers. Others mocked investigators. In one message, he threatened to shoot school buses full of children. In another, he sent a Halloween card to a reporter, signed "Your Secret Pal." And through it all, the Zodiac's codes continued to baffle experts. The 340-character cipher, known as Z340, remained unsolved for 51 years, until 2020, when a team of code breakers finally cracked it. I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. Even in his words, there was no confession, just ego, riddles, and cruelty. The Zodiac wasn't killing for revenge or money. He was killing for attention, and the world gave it to him. In every great mystery, there are suspects, and the Zodiac had many. But one man has remained the prime focus for over 50 years. Arthur Lee Allen, a former schoolteacher with a history of violence. Allen was questioned in 1971 after a friend claimed he had talked about wanting to kill couples at random. He also wore a Zodiac brand wristwatch with the same crosshair logo. Police searched his home and found weapons, homemade bombs, and tape recordings. Yet there was no solid evidence linking him to the murders. His fingerprints didn't match. His handwriting was inconsistent. In 1992, Allen died of a heart attack. Never charged, never cleared. But technology wasn't done with him. In 2002, DNA extracted from stamps on the Zodiac letters was compared to Allen's profile. The results? Inconclusive. The DNA didn't match, but investigators admitted the letters may have been handled by others. Other suspects followed: journalist Richard Gaikowski, who matched the voice and physical description; Earl Van Best Jr., accused by his own son decades later; and a mysterious man named Lawrence Kane, identified by several witnesses. But each lead ended the same way: dead ends, conflicting evidence, and another letter from the Zodiac laughing at investigators' failure. It seemed the killer was always one step ahead. Decades passed. Files gathered dust. Detectives retired. Reporters died, and the trail went cold. Yet the obsession never faded. In 2021, a team of cold case investigators called the Case Breakers named a new suspect: Gary Francis Post, a U.S. Air Force veteran who had died in 2018. They claimed forensic evidence, hidden photographs, and scar comparisons linked Post to the Zodiac's composite sketch. But law enforcement agencies refused to confirm it. The official position remains: the Zodiac Killer case is still open. More recently, advanced DNA technology has been used to identify serial killers decades after their crimes, like the Golden State Killer, caught through genetic genealogy in 2018. Many believe the same method could finally unmask the Zodiac, but others argue the truth died with him. 50 years later, the ciphers are solved, the witnesses are gone, but the fear remains. Because what haunted people most wasn't that he killed, it was that he never stopped watching. The Zodiac didn't just change crime, he changed culture. He became a media phenomenon. His letters dominated headlines. His symbol appeared on walls, buttons, and graffiti. Hollywood turned his story into movies, from Dirty Harry to Zodiac, 2007. But underneath the sensationalism was a deeper truth. The Zodiac showed how fear can spread faster than bullets, how one man's ego could manipulate an entire city. In his letters, he called himself the Zodiac. In reality, he was a man who weaponized mystery. And maybe that's why he was never caught. Because the Zodiac wasn't just a killer, he was a mirror of the paranoia that defined a generation. It's been more than half a century since the Zodiac last wrote a letter. No one knows if he died, was imprisoned under another name, or simply stopped killing. But somewhere in the endless files of police archives, his real identity still hides, waiting for one final piece of evidence to surface. Was the Zodiac a lone genius, or a myth created by fear? Did he outsmart the world, or did we create a monster too big to ever be caught? The letters have stopped. The trail is cold. But the mystery remains. For 50 years, he haunted the headlines. The coded letters, the mocking tone, the murders that seemed unsolvable. But what if the Zodiac was never the ghost we imagined? What if he walked among the very people sworn to catch him? 2019, San Francisco Police Department. Deep in the archives, a civilian analyst reviewing decades-old homicide files finds a single brown envelope misshelved behind burglary records. Inside, a black and white photograph of a fingerprint card. On the back, handwritten in fading ink, Zodiac partial, do not disclose. The analyst logs it, assuming it's routine. But within days, the file disappears again. No entry, no record. It should have ended there, another lost scrap of history, but it didn't. Because one retired detective, Jim Morales, still had a copy. Morales, who'd worked the Zodiac detail in the 1970s, claimed the print matched someone inside the force, a technician who handled evidence from the Paul Stein murder. And his name had surfaced before, In Zodiac's own letters, the man was Robert Graysmith, a lab assistant turned crime reporter, the same man whose later book, Zodiac, defined public understanding of the case. Morales believed Graysmith wasn't merely chronicling events. He might have been closer to them than anyone knew. The theory seemed outrageous. A journalist as the killer, but Morales wasn't alone. In the early 2000s, private investigators began re-examining police communications logs from 1969. They noticed something odd. Internal memos about unauthorized media leaks, descriptions of crime scene details that appeared in newspapers before they were officially released. Some officers suspected a press informant inside the department. Others feared it was something worse, that the informant was also the killer, feeding his own myth to the media. Was Graysmith the Zodiac? Probably not, but the confusion highlighted how porous the investigation had become. Evidence passed through too many hands, lines blurred between fact and fiction, and the Zodiac thrived in that chaos. Late 2020. In Virginia, a cryptographer named David Oranchak and two others finally cracked the 340 symbol, cipher sent half a century earlier. Hidden within the message, they noticed patterns, subtle misspellings, double letters, and mathematical sequences that seemed deliberate. One sequence matched an internal police radio frequency used by the San Francisco PD in 1969. Another spelled out a time and location corresponding to the night of Paul Stein's murder. Was it coincidence or proof the killer had access to privileged information? Analysts ran statistical models. The odds of both coincidences occurring by chance, less than 1 in a million. If true, the Zodiac may have been listening to police transmissions, predicting their moves, and mocking them with their own codes. That discovery reignited an old suspicion that the Zodiac wasn't a lone madman. He may have been part of a small network, perhaps military or ex-law enforcement, using coded correspondence as a deadly game. In 2021, the volunteer cold case team known as the Casebreakers announced a new suspect, Gary Francis Post, an Air Force veteran and house painter from California who died in 2018. They claimed scars on his forehead matched those in the Zodiac composite sketch, and that his name fit cryptic anagrams within the letters. Locals recalled Post's training young men in firearms and survival tactics in the mountains, a kind of militia. And his former associates claimed he spoke often about hunting humans. But without DNA, it's speculation. The FBI declined comment, and the San Francisco police still list the case as open. Yet Post's background, military communications, cryptography, and radar fits chillingly well with the theory of a killer who understood radio codes. If the Zodiac had insider knowledge of police procedure, Post would have had the training to exploit it. The idea reframes everything, that the Zodiac wasn't a mythical genius, but a disciplined technician using terror as performance. While investigators chased suspects, the media built an icon. By 1971, the Zodiac had become a cultural brand, every letter printed, every threat amplified. The killer understood publicity. He exploited journalists, fed their hunger for headlines, and used them as unwilling accomplices. In one interview, a retired editor admitted, "We gave him a stage. And once you give a monster a microphone, he never stops performing." Decades later, true crime films and documentaries would resurrect him again. Each time, the mystery reborn for a new generation. But behind the fascination lies tragedy. 7 confirmed victims, possibly more than 30, their names often overshadowed by his. It's easy to forget that behind the codes and symbols were human lives, teenagers, taxi drivers, college students, ordinary people caught in an extraordinary nightmare. Technology once unthinkable in 1969 is now routine. Familial DNA searches have identified dozens of cold case killers. In 2022, investigators quietly resubmitted envelopes from Zodiac's letters for new analysis using microtraces of skin cells left under the stamps. Early results hinted at partial genetic matches, none publicly confirmed. But one confidential source claimed a familial link was discovered to a living male with past law enforcement ties. If true, the story comes full circle. A killer hiding in plain sight, protected by the uniform meant to stop him. Forensic experts caution restraint. Contamination is possible, and speculation ruins lives. Still, within Scotland Yard's cold case unit, the Zodiac file remains a teaching model, how arrogance, bureaucracy, and media pressure can derail even the biggest investigation. There's a paradox in unsolved crimes. The less we know, the more power the mystery holds. For decades, the Zodiac had that power, controlling the narrative, shaping public fear. But today, the power has shifted. Thousands of amateur sleuths across the world analyze every cipher, every police memo, every rumor. The killer once hid behind his codes. Now he can't hide from digital transparency. Yet with each new lead comes another risk: obsession replacing justice, speculation replacing fact. Because when a case becomes legend, the truth can vanish inside the noise. Maybe the Zodiac's final victory isn't that he escaped capture, but that he made us question whether we can ever really know evil when we see it. Half a century on, the Zodiac's letters are museum pieces, his crimes historical footnotes. But the shadow he casts still stretches across every unsolved case, every anonymous threat, every coded message that lands on a detective's desk. The case taught investigators that intelligence without empathy can become arrogance, and arrogance is fatal in the hunt for truth. Perhaps the real cipher was never in the letters at all. Perhaps it was in us, our fascination with monsters, our need to name them, our fear of admitting they might be ordinary. And maybe that's why the Zodiac will never truly die. But what if a forgotten case file in Northern California holds a clue everyone missed? A partial DNA match and a familiar name. They said the Zodiac letter stopped in 1974, that his final message, mocking, cryptic, was the last word of a killer who simply vanished. But what if the story didn't end there? What if one more letter slipped through the cracks? In 2015, a retired postal clerk named Ed Barlow was clearing out an old sorting depot in Vallejo, California, the same city where the Zodiac first struck in 1969. Inside a sealed metal bin marked "Damaged Undelivered, 1970 to 1975, Barlow found an envelope. Yellowed paper, faint smell of smoke. The address, San Francisco Chronicle. The handwriting hauntingly familiar. He opened it carefully, expecting nothing. Instead, he found a page of handwritten symbols and 5 words scrawled in blue ink. "You stopped looking too soon." The letter was postmarked July 1978, 4 years after the Zodiac's supposed final communication. But here's the problem. Police already had a 1978 Zodiac letter, and they declared it a forgery. So what was this? A copy? A hoax? Or proof that the original dismissal had been a cover-up? When the Chronicle forwarded the find to police, the response was swift and defensive. "We are aware of no additional authentic Zodiac correspondence," the San Francisco PD wrote. "This is not new evidence." But behind the scenes, something else was happening. 2 weeks later, that very letter was quietly collected by federal agents and logged into an FBI evidence archive in Quantico, file designation ZFA 241. Officially, the letter was described as potentially related to ongoing inquiries. Unofficially, it was never mentioned again. Investigative journalists tried to obtain copies through the Freedom of Information Act. Each request was denied, citing national security exemptions. National security for a 1970s serial killer? For years, the existence of that envelope remained rumor, until one photograph surfaced, leaked by a retired FBI archivist. The picture showed an envelope addressed in Zodiac's distinctive scrawl and a return name in the corner, a name that would shock investigators: Gary Francis Post. Post, the Air Force veteran named by the casebreakers in 2021 as the potential Zodiac killer. He died 3 years earlier. His DNA, they claimed, matched hair found on a victim's clothing, but police refused to confirm it. Now here was a letter, allegedly written 4 years after Zodiac went silent, with Post's name printed on it. Coincidence or confession? Former forensic analyst Linda Marchand was among the few to see the letter up close. She confirmed the ink, paper, and stamp were period-accurate, mid-1970s U.S. issue. And under infrared scanning, something chilling appeared. Fingerprints, 3 partials. One matched the pattern type of the print labeled Zodiac Partial, Do Not Disclose, the same from the lost file in Part 2. After 50 years, two separate pieces of evidence, the hidden fingerprint and the missing letter, were pointing to the same man. But that wasn't the only revelation. In the margin of the note, invisible to the naked eye, a faint embossed phrase read, "I'll never be far." Words that, to some, sounded like a threat, to others, a goodbye. In late 2022, a California journalist named Emily Rohn began investigating the mysterious 1978 letter for an upcoming documentary. Within weeks, her requests to the FBI were blocked. She received an official warning: active case material. Further dissemination could obstruct ongoing federal review. Rohn's producer later claimed an anonymous caller told them the letter had counterintelligence significance. That's when she discovered something unexpected: a classified Cold War program called Project Zodiac, active between 1974 and 1978. Its mission: monitoring domestic communications for coded messages, possibly linked to espionage. The code name wasn't a coincidence. It came after the killer's reign of terror, which meant the US government had borrowed the Zodiac's name, even as he taunted them. Some believe the killer may have been part of this project, a contractor, a coder, a technician who blurred the line between cryptography and crime. If true, the murders may have been more than sadistic. They could have been camouflage for testing code-breaking systems, misdirection during an era of paranoia and surveillance. The theory sounds wild, but so did the idea of a man who mailed his own crimes in ciphers until it happened. Early 2023, a new private DNA firm in California, Zodiac Labs, quietly uploads partial genetic data to GED Match, the same public genealogy site that helped identify the Golden State Killer. The sample? From the adhesive on a 1969 Zodiac envelope. The match came back within days, not to a single individual, but to a family cluster in Northern California. Among them, a surname long associated with law enforcement, Post. The discovery was reported to the FBI. Within 48 hours, the data was removed from the database. Sources close to the lab claimed they were served with a cease and desist order under federal secrecy laws. One scientist later said, "I don't know if we found the killer, but we definitely found someone they don't want us to find." Officially, the Zodiac investigation remains open. Unofficially, it has become a case that no one wants to solve. 50 years of fear, thousands of pages of speculation, and endless theories. The Zodiac's legacy isn't just his brutality, it's what he revealed about us. Our obsession with mystery, our trust in authority, and how easily truth can vanish when hidden behind red tape. Behind every cipher and code, there were real lives. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, Paul Stein. Their stories deserve more than riddles. They deserve answers. Maybe that's the final lesson of the Zodiac, that the most dangerous killers aren't just those who take lives, but those who steal truth. The 1978 letter remains locked in an FBI archive, the fingerprint file still sealed. No one knows why, or if they'll ever be released. The killer who taunted the world with puzzles may have left his final message, not on paper, but in silence. Some mysteries end with handcuffs, others end with a whisper. The Zodiac story began with a cipher, and half a century later, it ends with one last question. Did we fail to catch him, or did we help him disappear? I'm your host, and this is UK Crime Mysteries.